let's talk a little bit about virtual reality. We talk about the data stream just coming into your consciousness. You can't tell the difference whether or not you're here or whether you're just in a hole someplace and you're getting this data, or whether none of it exists, either the hole or here, and you're just consciousness getting this data. It's all the same. It's a multiplayer game. I don't know how many of you are familiar with games like EverQuest or World of Warcraft, and there's others. We have multiplayer games. All the players come in and they interact with each other, plus they interact with computer characters. And they make a good analogy for what we're experiencing here. It's a similar sort of thing. Okay, the characters in the game and the game setting are basically you and your objective reality. You're the characters in the game, and the game setting is the physical reality. Okay, the server generates the set, enforces the rule set, defining characters. It also serves as the interface between the characters and the players. Now, who are the players? The players in this server, that's your consciousness. Okay, so that's your physical body here, but that's your consciousness. Okay, so your consciousness is the player out there telling its character, you know, run away, or stay and fight, or go do this mission or that mission. Okay, that's the player. You're the character. All right. Now the local computer stores the character's content and experience. Now that's let's say it's your brain. You know, we just use that as a metaphor. There's other places where you can store information besides the brain, but we'll just say that that's your brain for now. It's easy. So the local computer stores the character's content and experience and self-modification. Okay. Now in the computer games, they don't actually let the local character store that, because the local character would probably cheat if he had that on his own computer. He'd suddenly push himself up a bunch of points, you know, go to the next level or something if he controlled all that data. So they keep that on the main server, and they don't let the local character have it. But here, that's not a problem. It's harder to cheat. You can still cheat, but it is a lot harder. So that's not allowed, but that's not important where that's exactly stored. So it's the players that provide the free will, the intent, the intuition, the guidance, direction, consciousness. You know, and you want to call that oversoul, superego, higher self, whatever you'd like to call that. Then that's the role you are, is out there with the joystick, telling it what to do, you know, giving it nudges in various directions. But then it has to work within that rule set that it has in that game. So it's a similar kind of thing. Virtual reality is virtual reality. So there's multiple data streams, multiple virtual realities. I break them into two kinds. A more constrained is the ones that have more rules. The more rules you have, the more interaction is scripted, and the more feedback you get, immediate feedback. Okay, now you get too many rules, and you know, the decision space you have, or the amount of free will, what you can do, starts to decrease. You have too few rules, and it's all loose and airy, and you can't, nothing's defined. You don't have any defined interactions, and it's very difficult to learn anything. So there's just this right place in between that makes a good virtual reality. And the less constrained ones are the ones that we call the other side, you know, out there, the non-physical reality. That's a less constrained. It's still a virtual reality. So, you know, when your Uncle Fred passes away and he goes to the other side, he's just gone to a different virtual reality. All these reality frames are virtual realities. The only thing that's fundamental is consciousness. So a lot of people have the idea, well, okay, physical, dense, and it's a virtual reality. But then, you know, once you get on the other side, that's the real, that's the real place. But it's just a different virtual reality. It has its own purpose. There's the things you do there and the things that it suits, and that virtual reality is developed to meet that purpose. Again, think of this as a big system. It's evolving. It's constructing itself to make this evolution more efficient. So it creates all sorts of virtual realities in which you can interact and learn. One of them is this physical one, another one is a dream, another one is what happens to you after you leave this physical, and so on. So it's a system that's self-optimizing. Okay, so you can just as easily say that, well, everything's physical then. You know, this is physical, the dreams are physical, all these realities are physical, and you could say that everything's physical, we just don't see anyone but this. And that's sort of the way a lot of physicists take it, you know, because they don't like saying things are non-physical. So everything is physical, even the non-physical is physical. But you can say just the same, the opposite. Everything is non-physical. You know, there's nothing that's physical. All that's physical is just an illusion. That's another way of saying it, but both of them basically end up at the same place. It's just one of them is kind of Twilight Zone, you know, and people stay away from it, and the other one is hard science. But it's basically the same logical construct. It doesn't matter whether you say everything's physical or everything's non-physical. It's all virtual realities within consciousness, which is the larger system. Now, a few things about consciousness, and that is that consciousness is a finite system. It's another thing that kind of gets people, they don't like that. It's not an infinite system. Okay, you know, why isn't it an infinite system? Because consciousness is real. Real systems aren't infinite, because real systems have to have finite energy, finite capacity, finite abilities. Infinite systems have to have infinite energy, you know, infinite time, infinite everything to support an infinite system. You can't support an infinite system without everything else being infinite. Well, what is infinite? Infinite is just an abstraction. There is no such thing as infinite. In mathematics, things approach infinity but never get there. Infinity is an idealization. It's not an actual state that something real can be in. You know, infinite started out in mathematics as the largest, you know, numbers get bigger and bigger and bigger, and eventually they get infinite. Right now, they never get infinite. If you took the largest number that you could somehow come up with, you could always take that number and, you know, raise it to the power of itself, you know, multiply it by 10, whatever. It is a bigger number. And that number, well, you could always make it bigger. There is no end. There is no infinity. It's just that's an abstraction. It's not real. Nothing real is infinite. And as soon as you say, well, it's not infinite, everybody's thinking, well, then what's outside of that? You know, if it's finite, what's on the outside boundary of this finite thing? Everything that's finite has a boundary. Well, back to the bacterium. You passed your point of being able to tell what's out there, and that doesn't mean that it isn't necessarily significant to you. You don't know whether it is or not, but all you know is that the larger consciousness system is as far as you can go, because you're consciousness and you're inside that system. So it has to be finite to be real. It's real. You know, here we are, you know. We're communicating, we're sharing data. So it's a real system. Therefore, it has to be finite. All right. So you can, when you go into these altered states, what you're doing is you're letting your consciousness kind of roam in the larger system. Instead of just being tied to this one data stream with this one rule set attached to it, and you're getting data, it's a multiplayer game. We're all in this game together. So, you know, I made this workshop and put out flyers, and you saw them, and you came, and you registered, and, you know, we're all in this multiplayer game and interacting just like World of Warcraft or something. It's the same kind of thing. But you don't have to just stay in this system. You are consciousness. You can roam around in that larger system if you want. And sometimes people call that hacking the system. You know, it's not really hacking the system. What it is that you have this data stream coming in, and you can say, all right, that's fine, but let me attach to a different one. Well, let's do it nighttime. This one shuts down. When you're asleep, this reality disappears. You're no longer in this physical reality. You're in the dream reality. You know, you're saving people, you're doing whatever, you know, you're arguing, you're fighting, you're running from monsters, whatever it is you do in your dreams, you're in that reality system doing that. You're not in this system anymore. This one's gone. This one's now non-physical. So it's just switching to a different data stream, different rule set. You do different things. Well, you can just as easily switch that to other reality systems. You can go out and visit Uncle Fred who passed away. That's a different reality system, another virtual system. Switch your data set to that. So it's just a matter of what data stream you pick. When your awareness is in that data stream defines what your awareness is aware of. You know, that's the information coming to you. You interpret that information the best way you can. And we'll get to that a little later. The best way you can means you have to interpret it based on your own experience, because you started out in this physical reality. Now that's kind of your home base. You're kind of limited to that experience set. So you get this other information from this other data stream. What do you make of it? Well, at first, it's just an experience, a non-intelligible experience. not an experience that you can put into words, not an experience that even makes sense to you. It's just an experience, and you probably get that as a feeling, as a sense of knowing, but you're not quite sure knowing what or whatever. You may not connect to it, but then you have to interpret it. If you're going to make it rational to yourself, you have to interpret it in terms of your own ideas, in terms of your own experience set that you have there in the local computer in here that you've gotten. You have to interpret it that way. And that means it's limited by you. It's limited by your experience. It's limited by your understanding. It's limited by your beliefs, because you won't interpret it into anything that isn't inside your beliefs, your understanding. So to put it into language, which is the next barrier after just making it rational to yourself, you have to put it in English words, and so you can tell somebody else about it or write it in a book. Now you've limited again. You've run through another filter of explanation. And by then, the words are just the barest shadow of the original experience. But we tend to believe those words, and we make up models with those words, and often those words then become sacred to us, and we fight over those words because we know, by God, they're real. And really, it's just our interpretation of something larger. So that's what the OB is, and other things. I stuck UFOs in there because that explains that phenomena too. A lot of the UFO sightings have to do with people processing in two reality frames at the same time. Now that's not hard to do. You have this data stream, you have that data stream. You don't have to move from this one to that one. We do that at night. We drop one and pick up another one. But you can easily train yourself to parallel process to where you can do more than one data stream at a time. When you do, basically the two realities overlay each other, and you have no ability to really distinguish between one or the other if you're a novice and it just happens to you. You know, if it's not something you've kind of trained and learned and you understand the different realities and where they're coming from, then you can separate them. But if it just happens to you and you're getting more than one reality, well, then you wake up and there's an alien standing at the foot of your bed. That alien is in another reality frame, and you're parallel processing, and so it looks like it's in this reality frame because data's data to you. It's just data, and if you get it, you interpret it. And that's, I think a lot of the UFO is a parallel processing of multiple frames. It's not that these people are crazy and that they don't experience these things. They experience them, but they're not exactly what they think. It's not all as physical as they think. Well, their own bodies are not as physical as they think. You know, nothing of it is as physical as you think. So it's all virtual reality. Okay, in a multiplayer virtual reality system, present choices drive change, right? Your character in your virtual reality is what drives change. It's what the character does. You can sit back as the oversoul, if you like, of your character and think of all the strategies and things you're going to have your character to do, but nothing changes until you actually make the character do something, right? The action in the game happens in the present. It doesn't happen up in the consciousness space. It happens in the present. All action is in the present, and the server records everything. So every time your character, jumps, runs, chases, dives, whatever it does, that's in the server, because it has to keep a historical record. It just can't have your character, 1 minute here and another minute someplace else doing a different thing. It all has to be consistent. So that's saved. Well, our system works basically the same way. Our system cranks along one delta t at a time, our simulation. Every delta t, it updates. There is a database called the probable future database where all possible choices are and their probabilities. And we're going to see that a little later. I'll get a little more detail. But that's everything that could happen, everything that might happen. And I mean everything. And the probability of all of those things happening. And then of all those probabilities, you can look at the highest probability. What's the greatest probability of those things happen? You take all the greatest probabilities of those things happen, you assume that that's what happens, and then you do it again, the next delta t. Well, if those things happened, and that was the greatest probability, then what would all the choices be, and what would be the most probable? And if those most probable happen, then what all the choices would be and what would be most probable. And you keep working that up one delta t at a time, so you build up this probable reality database that can list out for a long, long time what is probable, what is most probable, or what is just probable. And that's a database. You're in an information system, a digital information system, okay? So this is just a database that contains all the probable things and their probability. Now, the other database you get is the actualized past database. That's everything that you did in the present. All the actions you took. You have free will, you use your intent, you do something, you have an action. That action in the present is stored. Okay, and that becomes then the next delta t, that one's stored, the next delta t, that one's stored. So you take the series of those, and that's what I call your history thread. It's a record of all the things you did. And then there's one more database, and that's a record of all the things you could have done but didn't. So all those choices that were in the probability database, you do one in the present, that becomes past, but all the ones that you didn't do, they go to the past, unactualized database, along with all their probabilities that you might have done them in, but didn't. So you have 3 databases. Those 3 databases are where almost all our information comes from when we interact. Those 3 databases, if you go to the, I'm not sure which philosophy it is, probably the Hindu theology, that would be the Akashic records, right? That's what they would call some of these databases. It's basically the records of everything that happens in this information system. So that's where your precognitive dreams come from. That means you're getting data out of the future probable database. Just because it's probable doesn't even have to happen. You're not required to do what's most probable. That's one thing that we have as free will. You can do whatever you damn well please. You can do something really, really dumb, and that's all right. It may not have been very probable that you did that. They thought you were smarter than that, but you weren't. So you do something really, really dumb. Well, all they have to do then is they recalculate the probability that are attached to that. All right, you did something that wasn't expected, then they just have to modify the things that touches as it goes up. They don't have to recalculate everything, just the stuff that modifies. So then that gets recalculated. Now, you say, geez, that's an awful lot of calculations. This is an awfully good computer. It is, but there's a time difference. And we talked about time. The time is not the same all over. Remember, the system makes up its own time, right? It's going tick-tock, tick-tock, making up time. Well, this simulation has its own clock, has its own time. Other simulations run on their own time. It's not like there's one big clock and everybody dances to that tune. And this simulation's time, the time increments are huge compared to the time increments in the next level out. So it's like in a simulation where you have loops. You have sub-simulations, subsets, subroutines inside a simulation. Well, this subroutine, say, only gets incremented every 10,000 increments of the master subroutine. So you only increment it, every 10,000 times that you go around, you're going through this loop. Well, we're one of those loops. So we only get incremented every so often for our delta t. So the system that's just above us, the non-physical, looser constrained thing, it runs on a much faster, it has a much smaller delta t. And consciousness itself, of course, is the master loop, and it has the smallest delta t. So you think it's a lot of calculations, but the system has literally billions of cycles to do that in, and we haven't even moved 1 delta t yet. So it's not as hard a problem as you think. The system has evolved to be fairly clever. Okay, so those are the databases. We'll do more about that later. All right, this is basically how it works. This little cartoon, just so you can get, that's pretty abstract that I'm telling you. So here's our system. Remember, our system is our physical universe plus all of what's non-physical that interacts with the physical. That's where Uncle Fred is he's still in OS even though he's not in the physical system yet. All right, so this system has a choice to split 3 ways. There's just 3 choices. Now, there's really billions of choices in our system, but I couldn't put billions of circles up there. It just wouldn't work. I tried, but after the second billion, it got too cluttered. So I dropped down to 3. So here's the three choices. This is our system. It can go to our system 1, 2, or 3. And in a present moment, it makes the choices and ends up over here in 3. Okay, and then from 3, suddenly when it's here, all of this stuff now, or the things it didn't do, fall into that database of the things that could have happened but didn't happen. Okay, now all this stuff that's ahead of 3, all of these are now still in the virtual probable. It's things that it could, states that it could go to. And it has to make another choice, so now it makes a choice to this one. So it didn't go to this one or this one, it went to that one. Now all of these things that are here drop into the could have happened but didn't. And all the things that in the future probability database are now in these that are attached up ahead of that, and so on. It moves to here. So you see that every time a state changes, you have certain things drop into all 3 databases. Change every time we have a state change. So the system just tracks the data that way. Okay, next. That just gives you a little cartoon. Now here's that future probability surface. Time is going out radially in all directions. So that's time, and that's time, and that's time. Time goes from the center out. So that the very center is t equals 0. That's the present. Now these are probabilities. The vertical, you can't read that black. That says probability. Hard to see on that blue. I should make that white, I guess. You have all these different probabilities. And here's some probabilities that are very low and flat. You know, in time, it could be this event could happen over any of these times. Here's one that's all happens about the same time and has a fairly high probability. In around the close to 0, the probabilities grow, get higher and higher, because now there's fewer and fewer calculations, right? You're getting closer and closer to the present. The probabilities of certain things happening get closer and closer. So you can pretty well guess what's going to happen, you know, a second from now, right? You're going to be here sitting listening to me, right? That wasn't a hard guess. So those kinds of things are easy. But if it goes up to what are you going to be doing tomorrow or the next day or next year, then you get further and further out in here, and your peaks get smaller and smaller. You know, there's certain probabilities of things you're going to be doing maybe a month or a week or a year from now, but the probabilities are low because you can make a lot of changes between now and then, and things change. But every once in a while, like here, you'll have a peak that's really high and it's pretty far out. And here's one that's pretty high, that's pretty far out, and those are things that would be a good bet if you were a prognosticator. You know, those would be the things that have a high probability of happening, even though they're far out. That happens sometimes. Mostly, you get these kind of things that here's a smear, you know, in the event space, which is the space that's going around the circle, and some smear in time. But as you get in, the peaks grow. So that's what a future probability, and then they disappear down a rabbit hole in the center, right? That's the present. So you just think of the surface as constantly